Most people think the loudest sound in the world is a breaking heart. They are wrong. The most deafening sound is the dead silence of a woman realizing she holds every trump card. When my husband texted a photo kissing my best friend on a yacht in Cabo, he thought he took my love, dignity, and wealth. He forgot one lethal Silicon Valley rule: never betray the person who wrote the source code to your life. Hello to the wonderful audience of Violet Revenge Stories, and I want to sincerely thank you for being here with me today. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently disabled our monetization features, leaving us without the necessary budget to sustain our operations and pay our hardworking staff. If you find yourself captivated by today's story, please consider supporting us with a contribution of just $1 by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the donation link in the video description and pinned comment, so we can continue creating these experiences for you. My name is Mia Moore. I am 38 years old, and I navigate the invisible battlegrounds of the digital world as a cybersecurity systems architect for Aegis Data Solutions, a towering tech conglomerate based in Seattle. My entire professional existence revolves around predicting vulnerabilities, securing perimeters, and neutralizing internal threats before they can cause catastrophic damage. I am trained to look at a complex system, identify the absolute weakest link, and eliminate the risk without a single trace of emotion. Strangely enough, I never applied that rigorous analytical framework to my own marriage. The notification arrived at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning. The harsh, artificial glow of the smartphone screen sliced through the darkness of our master bedroom, illuminating the empty space beside me where my husband usually slept. His name is Julian. He is a charismatic, impossibly charming entrepreneur in the food and beverage industry, a man whose entire personality is built on grand visions and infectious enthusiasm. I reach for the phone, groggy, expecting a panicked message about a delayed flight or a logistical nightmare regarding his upcoming restaurant launch. Instead, an image rendered itself on my screen. It was a high-resolution photograph taken on the sun-drenched deck of a luxury yacht in Cabo San Lucas. Julian was there, tanned and smiling that million-dollar smile, holding a crystal flute of champagne, wrapped intimately around his arm, mirroring his triumphant grin, was Harper. Harper, the woman who had been my absolute best friend for 15 consecutive years. She was the person who held my dress on my wedding day, the confidant who knew my deepest, darkest secrets. Now, she was toasting to my destruction. Beneath the photograph, a single line of text materialized. It read, "I ran away with your best friend. We are never coming back." Conventional human psychology dictates a highly specific sequence of reactions to this level of profound betrayal. The standard protocol involves a sudden spike in adrenaline, followed by hyperventilation, tears, and perhaps the violent hurling of the nearest fragile object against a wall. I felt the initial, icy prick of shock at the base of my spine, but before the grief could even register in my chest, a completely different mechanism took over. My brain, meticulously wired by years of neutralizing hostile digital incursions, bypassed the emotional processing center entirely. It immediately initiated a protocol of threat isolation. Julian wanted a reaction. He wanted the chaotic, hysterical validation of a broken woman. I refused to give him a single drop of that satisfaction. My fingers hovered over the glass keyboard for a fraction of a second before I typed a simple, two-word response. "Good luck." I pressed send. I did not block his number. I did not call him screaming. I simply set the phone face down on the nightstand. The silence in the house was absolute, save for the rhythmic, soothing drumming of the Seattle rain against the reinforced glass windows. I threw off the silk covers and walked calmly over to my home office. If you asked 100 betrayed spouses what to do in the first hour of discovering an affair, 99 of them would tell you to freeze the joint checking accounts and cancel the credit cards. That is a desperate, messy, and fundamentally temporary maneuver. I am not a desperate woman. I am an architect of systems. I opened my laptop and entirely bypassed our mundane financial portals. Instead, My keystrokes directed me straight into the central server mainframe of the Gilded Vine. This was Julian's magnum opus, an ultra-exclusive, high-end smart restaurant that was just weeks away from its heavily publicized grand opening. It was the project that was supposed to catapult him into the elite circles of the culinary world. But Julian was merely the handsome face of the operation. I was the spine. I was the one who designed the intricate, bespoke software architecture that automated everything from the ambient lighting and inventory tracking to the secure payment gateways and VIP reservations. Staring at the lines of code scrolling across my monitor, I felt a chilling, absolute calm wash over me. With the precise, deliberate strokes of a surgeon wielding a scalpel, I accessed the core administrative database. First, I located Julian's master user profile. I executed a command that silently stripped him of all administrative privileges. Next, I navigated to the overarching security protocols and permanently revoked the digital security certificates required to operate the restaurant's proprietary management software. Within 4 minutes, Julian was effectively locked out of his own empire, to the system. The great visionary was now nothing more than an unrecognized, unauthorized ghost. The execution was flawless, quiet, and absolutely lethal to his business infrastructure. I did not leave a chaotic mess. I simply turned off the lights in his digital house and changed the locks. I closed the laptop, the soft click echoing in the quiet room. My heart rate was steady, resting at a perfectly normal rhythm. I walked downstairs to the kitchen, steeped a warm cup of chamomile tea, and drank it slowly while watching the rain wash over the sleeping city. Then, I walked back upstairs, slipped under the covers, and went to sleep for exactly 5 hours. The storm was coming, but I was the one who controlled the weather. The dawn broke over Seattle not with a triumphant sunrise, but with a sullen, slate-gray sky that mirrored the exact temperature of my blood. I arrived at the towering glass and steel headquarters of Aegis Data Solutions a full 2 hours before my usual shift. The expansive corporate floors were deserted, save for the faint hum of the climate control systems and the soft glow of standby monitors. I swiped my keycard, bypassed the standard security checkpoints with my clearance, and settled into the ergonomic chair of my private glass-walled office. The view offered a sweeping panorama of the rain-slicked city below, a grid of interconnected lives completely unaware of the digital autopsy I was about to perform. I booted up my primary workstation. The monitors flared to life, casting a sharp blue light across my face. Today, I was not hunting foreign state hackers or corporate espionage syndicates. I was hunting the two people I had trusted most in the world. I initiated a deep-dive packet sniff, an unauthorized access scan on the personal and professional networks Julian and I shared. In the realm of cybersecurity, there is a fundamental truth that amateurs always forget. The internet never forgets, and deleted files are never truly gone. They are simply waiting for someone with the right tools to find them. It took exactly 45 minutes to crack the encrypted backup drive Julian kept synced to his home office router. He used his birth date and the name of his childhood dog as the encryption key. It was an insult to my profession. Really. Once inside, I did not look for love letters or intimate photographs. I followed the money. The data trail was sloppy, leaving breadcrumbs a novice could track. I opened a series of offshore transaction logs and hidden corporate registries. What I found dismantled the narrative of a simple, passionate affair. This was a calculated, long-term financial coup. A document, buried under a mislabeled folder titled Kitchen Inventory Projections, revealed the first devastating truth. 6 months ago, Julian had quietly restructured the equity of the Gilded Vine. He had transferred a staggering 40% of the company's shares directly into a holding company registered under Harper's name. The justification listed on the corporate ledger was a comprehensive media consulting fee. Harper, whose only media experience consisted of curating an overly filtered social media feed, was now the majority co-owner of the empire I had funded and built. My jaw tightened, but my hands remained perfectly steady on the keyboard. I dug deeper, accessing a cached archive of Julian's private email server. I filtered the search parameters for Harper's address. Hundreds of threads populated the screen. I opened one dated from early October. "You need to tell her the supply chain issues are draining the operational budget." Harper had written, "Tell her you need another $50,000 to keep the lights on. She will write the check. She always does. Then take that money and wire it to the escrow account for the jeweler. I want the emerald cut. Julian, do not settle for less." A physical wave of nausea washed over me, but I forced myself to swallow it down. I cross-referenced the dates. That was the exact same week Julian had come to me, running his hands through his hair, pacing our living room, and begging for a capital injection to save the restaurant from premature bankruptcy. I had pulled the funds directly from my personal retirement savings, believing I was securing our future. Instead, I had purchased my best friend's engagement ring. The scope of their betrayal expanded with every click. I uncovered the master presentation deck for a massive Series A fundraising round scheduled for the end of the current month. The guest list included the most aggressive venture capitalists in the Pacific Northwest. Julian and Harper's pitch was audacious. They were not just selling a high-end dining experience, they were pitching my proprietary automated restaurant management software as their own invention. Their roadmap clearly outlined a plan to secure a $10 million valuation, sell the licensing rights, and immediately dilute my remaining shares to zero. They were going to legally orchestrate my exit, leaving me completely destitute while they sailed away on the wealth generated by my intellect. They had thought of everything: the manipulation, the theft, the grand exit strategy. It was a perfectly designed architectural blueprint for my ruin. However, Julian had committed a fatal error, an oversight so colossal it bordered on the absurd. He was a man of vision, a smooth talker who despised the tedious minutiae of legal paperwork. He had never actually read the impenetrable, 80-page intellectual property contract we signed during the initial incorporation phase. He simply assumed that because we were married, and because the software operated his restaurant, the company owned the code. He was wrong. I opened the digitized legal vault and pulled up the original patent and licensing agreements. The core software, the neural network that allowed the Gilded Vine to function, did not belong to the restaurant group. It was not a shared asset. It was exclusively copyrighted, trademarked, and licensed under a single, independent entity. That entity was Mia Moore. The restaurant was merely a temporary licensee, subject to termination at the sole discretion of the creator. I sat back in my chair, turning away from the monitors to look out the floor-to-ceiling windows. The Seattle rain was falling harder now, blurring the skyline into a gray, impressionistic smear. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face, reflecting faintly in the glass. They wanted to play a game of ruthless corporate sabotage. They wanted to steal my money, my dignity, and my future. But they had built their entire fortress on land they did not own, using blueprints they did not understand. I was not just going to divorce Julian. I was going to systematically dismantle their illusion of victory. I was going to let them climb to the very top of their imaginary castle, and then, with a single keystroke, I was going to turn the ground beneath them to dust. 2,000 miles away from the relentless gray drizzle of Seattle, the sun was setting over the Baja Peninsula, casting a golden hue across the crystal-clear waters of Cabo San Lucas. Julian and Harper were dining at a deeply exclusive, Michelin-starred restaurant carved directly into the seaside cliffs. I could visualize the scene with perfect clarity because Julian, in his infinite arrogance, had publicly tagged the location on his social media feed. They had just finished a 12-course tasting menu paired with rare vintage wines. They were living the illusion of a billionaire lifestyle, entirely funded by a financial pipeline they believed was infinite. Then came the moment the check arrived. Julian, projecting the casual confidence of a titan of industry, dropped his sleek black corporate card onto the silver tray without even glancing at the total. The impeccably dressed waiter bowed lightly and retreated. A few minutes later, the waiter returned. There was no bow this time. He leaned down and whispered a single, highly inconvenient word into Julian's ear. Declined. Julian, naturally, laughed it off. He played the part of the mildly annoyed wealthy patron, loudly blaming a bank security algorithm for flagging foreign travel. He reached into his designer wallet and produced a secondary, personal platinum card. He handed it over with a dismissive wave. The waiter retreated again. The waiter returned again, also declined. That was the exact moment the very first crack appeared in their romantic getaway. Harper, who had spent the last decade carefully cultivating an aura of effortless luxury on my dime, did not handle public humiliation well. The facade slipped. I could easily picture her frantic whispers, her embarrassed glances around the dining room, and the harsh, demanding tone she adopted as they were forced to call a junior assistant in Seattle to wire emergency funds just to cover the meal. They were sitting in paradise, blissfully unaware that I had systematically severed their financial oxygen supply at the source, while they scrambled to pay for their dinner. I was sitting in the corner office of Elias Vance. Elias was not a family law attorney. He did not care about emotional distress, alimony, or who got to keep the golden retriever. Elias was a corporate litigator, a notoriously ruthless predator who specialized in hostile takeovers and the total annihilation of competing entities. His office was a testament to his success, decorated in dark mahogany and absolute silence. We were not discussing the end of a marriage, we were planning an execution. Elias was reviewing the architecture of my software licenses and the corporate structure of the Gilded Vine. He nodded with a slow, dark satisfaction as he verified that my intellectual property rights were completely ironclad. We could freeze their entire operational capacity in a matter of seconds. Right as he closed the file, my phone vibrated on the heavy wooden desk. It was a text message from Julian. The tone was dripping with the false, patronizing confidence of a man who firmly believed he held the ultimate high ground. He told me I needed to pack my belongings and voluntarily vacate our marital home by the end of the week. He proudly confessed that he had leveraged the property, taking out a massive high-interest bridge loan to fund the lavish Series A fundraising event. He claimed that if I caused a scene or tried to fight him, the private lenders would immediately foreclose, leaving me totally homeless and drowning in debt. He advised me to walk away quietly, keep my dignity, and let him build his empire in peace. I slowly turned the phone around and pushed it across the desk so Elias could read the message. We did not panic. We did not scramble to call the bank. Instead, Elias let out a dry, humorless laugh that echoed off the glass walls. He opened a thick, leather-bound binder containing the physical lease agreements for the restaurant space. The Gilded Vine occupied 10,000 square feet of premium, highly coveted commercial real estate in the heart of downtown Seattle. Julian had signed a 10-year commercial lease, throwing millions of dollars into custom renovations. The landlord listed on the contract was a shadowy, anonymous holding corporation called Azure Holdings. Julian was a visionary, which meant he never bothered to dig into the tedious corporate veil of his vendors. For 24 consecutive months, he had been writing exorbitant rent checks to Azure Holdings without ever realizing that Azure Holdings was a blind shell company I had established 3 years prior. I was his landlord. The building belonged entirely to me. Julian thought he was backing me into a corner with his reckless debt. He thought he had weaponized our home against me, but he had built a majestic, sprawling castle on a foundation of sand that I legally owned, using digital tools that I had invented. We examined the commercial lease clauses together. Section 15 explicitly prohibited any unauthorized transfer of business equity without the express written consent of the landlord. By secretly transferring 40% of the company to Harper, Julian had triggered an automatic, non-negotiable default on his commercial lease. I looked at Elias, the cold Seattle rain beating against the windows behind him, and gave him my final directives. I instructed him to draft 3 specific documents in total secrecy. First, a standard divorce petition, completely devoid of any requests for a financial settlement. Second, an immediate revocation of the software license. Finally, the masterpiece of our strategy, a 24-hour commercial eviction notice. I told Elias to place all 3 documents in a secure vault. We were not going to strike today. We were not going to warn them. We were going to let them fly home, put on their best clothes, and stand on the grandest stage possible before I pulled the lever. The financial drought in Mexico forced their romantic getaway to an abrupt and highly unglamorous conclusion. Less than 96 hours after their triumphant departure, Julian and Harper were on a commercial flight back to the United States. They bypassed the baggage claim and drove a rented sedan straight up the winding, rain-slicked driveway of my private estate in the affluent suburbs of Seattle. Through the high-resolution security cameras I had been monitoring from the comfort of my living room, they looked exhausted, damp, and deeply irritable. Yet, despite their obvious fatigue, they still carried themselves with the absurd, inflated arrogance of conquerors returning to claim their spoils. Julian marched up the wet stone steps with a heavy leather briefcase gripped tightly in his right hand. Inside that briefcase, I knew for an absolute fact, were the legal documents he intended to force me to sign. Papers specifically drafted to relinquish my complete ownership of the proprietary restaurant software. He confidently reached for the digital keypad mounted beside the massive oak front door. He punched in his personalized 6-digit access code. A harsh, flashing red light illuminated the panel, accompanied by a sharp, discordant beep. The system denied him entry. A flicker of profound annoyance crossed his face, quickly replaced by a dismissive smirk as he leaned his eye toward the biometric retina scanner. The scanner cast a thin blue laser across his pupil, processing the biological data for a fraction of a second before the automated voice of the security system echoed softly across the porch. Access denied. Unauthorized user detected. Julian stepped back, his expression morphing from smug confidence to utter bewilderment. That was the exact moment Harper noticed the perimeter of the sprawling porch. Stacked with mathematical precision against the stone wall were 35 heavy-duty cardboard boxes. They were meticulously sealed with industrial tape and uniformly labeled in bold, black permanent marker. Julian's bespoke designer suits, Harper's expensive imported cosmetics, every single golf club, every pair of leather shoes, and every piece of jewelry they had carelessly left behind. The packing job was flawless. I had hired a premium, discreet relocation service to sweep the entire house the previous afternoon. They had packed away their entire existence down to the very last stray sock, leaving zero trace of their toxic presence in my sanctuary. The realization hit Julian like a physical blow. The suave, calculating entrepreneur vanished instantly, replaced by a volatile, unhinged man throwing a violent tantrum on my doorstep. He began pounding his fists relentlessly against the reinforced oak wood, his voice echoing over the sound of the falling rain. He yelled my name, demanding I open the door, commanding me to stop playing childish games. When I responded with absolute silence, he pulled out his smartphone and dialed emergency services. Through the hidden audio feed, I listened as he masterfully played the role of the terrified, victimized husband. He told the dispatcher that his emotionally unstable wife had locked him out of his own home, stolen his personal property, and was currently holding his belongings hostage in a fit of manic rage. 2 police patrol cars arrived exactly 12 minutes later, their blue and red lights cutting sharply through the dreary Seattle afternoon. The officers approached the porch with their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts, prepared for a domestic dispute. Julian rushed toward them, gesturing wildly at the boxes and pointing an accusatory finger at the security camera. He painted a vivid picture of a deranged woman orchestrating an illegal eviction. The lead officer stepped forward and knocked firmly on the door. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open. The visual contrast between Julian and myself could not have been more stark. He was standing in the freezing rain, his hair plastered to his forehead, his clothes wrinkled from the cheap economy flight, vibrating with uncontrollable rage. I stood in the warm, softly lit foyer, wearing a tailored cashmere sweater and perfectly pressed trousers. I greeted the officers with a calm, polite, and cooperative smile. Before Julian could launch into another hysterical tirade, I handed the lead officer a pristine manila folder. Inside was the original property deed, the comprehensive prenuptial agreement, and the updated security logs. I explained, in a voice completely devoid of emotion, that the estate was a premarital asset purchased entirely with my funds 3 years before I ever met the man screaming on the porch. I showed them the legal clause clearly stating that in the event of a separation, Julian had absolutely zero legal right to enter the premises. I had simply done him the courtesy of packing his belongings to expedite his permanent departure. The officer reviewed the documents carefully, handed them back with a respectful nod, and turned his attention to Julian. He informed my soon-to-be ex-husband that this was strictly a civil matter, that I was well within my legal rights as the sole property owner, and that he needed to gather his boxes and leave the private property immediately. Julian lost whatever small fraction of sanity he had left. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. He lunged forward, though the two officers quickly stepped into his path, placing their hands firmly on his chest. "You think you are so smart," Julian screamed, the veins bulging visibly in his neck. "The restaurant is what makes the money. You can keep this garbage house. Harper and I are going to be millionaires next week. We do not need your money, and we certainly do not need you." I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch or break eye contact. I simply gave him a slow, deliberate nod. I reached onto the entryway console table and picked up a single, crisp white envelope. I stepped past the officer and extended it through the doorway. Julian snatched it aggressively, ripping the seal open with his thumb. However, as his eyes scanned the heavy watermarked paper inside, his triumphant sneer slowly dissolved into absolute horror. It was not a divorce petition. It was a formal cease and desist and copyright infringement warning. Harper, sensing the catastrophic shift in the atmosphere, stepped out from under the porch awning and snatched the paper from his trembling hands. Her eyes darted frantically across the legal jargon. It clearly stated that the foundational software required to operate the Gilded Vine had been officially revoked by the legal owner. Furthermore, any attempt to boot the system, access the proprietary code, or present the technology to investors would result in immediate federal prosecution for corporate theft and fraud. Harper's deeply tanned face turned the color of wet ash. In that singular, devastating moment, the reality of their situation crashed down upon her. Without my automated systems, the multi-million-dollar smart restaurant they were about to present to the world's most aggressive venture capitalists was nothing more than an empty, functionless shell. They had absolutely nothing to sell. "Ma'am, sir," the lead officer said, his tone now carrying the heavy, uncompromising weight of authority. "You need to load your property into your vehicle and vacate these premises right now, or you will be arrested for trespassing." I did not say another word. I took a step back into my beautiful, quiet home, gently closing the heavy oak door on their horrified faces, and locked the deadbolt with a satisfying metallic click, driven by the sheer, unadulterated terror of public failure. Julian and Harper made the most predictable and catastrophic decision of their entire lives. Instead of heeding the stark, uncompromising legal warning delivered on my front porch, they chose to double down on their grand delusion. Cornered animals rarely calculate odds. They simply lash out with everything they have left, with exactly 48 hours remaining until the most critical venture capital showcase of their careers. They chose to ignore the cease and desist order entirely, through encrypted underground channels that I was easily able to trace from my home office. Julian liquidated the very last fraction of his available credit to hire a rogue team of black market cyber mercenaries. Their mandate was desperate and simple. They were instructed to brute force their way through my security protocols, bypass the digital locks I had placed on the restaurant's central servers, and keep the proprietary automation software online just long enough to fool the investors during the VIP pitch. It was Friday evening, precisely 7 o'clock. The relentless Seattle rain had finally subsided into a heavy atmospheric mist that clung tenaciously to the neon streetlights of the downtown commercial district. I was sitting comfortably in the spacious, climate-controlled leather interior of an idling, blacked-out sports utility vehicle. We were parked directly across the street from the towering, illuminated glass facade of the Gilded Vine. Beside me, Elias Vance tapped his expensive fountain pen rhythmically against a thick leather-bound folder, his sharp eyes fixed intensely on the glowing monitor mounted in the console between us. I had a high-grade, heavily encrypted laptop resting on my knees. The screen was divided into two distinct, highly detailed sections. On the left side, a crisp, high-definition grid of the restaurant's internal security cameras provided a flawless, invisible view of the unfolding spectacle inside. On the right side, a chaotic, rapid-fire waterfall of green data logs tracked the frantic, aggressive movements of the hackers Julian had employed. What Julian's expensive cyber thugs fundamentally failed to understand was that you cannot simply pick the digital lock of a fortress when the architect of that fortress is actively watching you from the inside. I did not block their amateurish brute force attacks. If I had simply shut them out, that would have immediately alerted them to my active presence and forced Julian to cancel the event. Blaming technical difficulties, I wanted them on that stage. So, instead of blocking them, I employed a classic, high-level cybersecurity countermeasure known as a honeypot. I deliberately unlatched a digital backdoor, creating a highly sophisticated, simulated environment that perfectly mirrored the actual operating system of the restaurant. I allowed them to believe they had successfully breached the firewall and reinstated Julian's administrative privileges. They thought they had won the war. In reality, they had merely walked directly into a tightly sealed digital cage, and I was the one holding the only key. Through the high-definition camera feeds, the grand opening of the Gilded Vine was a visual masterpiece of manufactured, hollow success. The vast, modern dining room was packed wall-to-wall with the absolute upper echelon of the Pacific Northwest venture capital scene. These were powerful men and women who controlled billions of dollars in investment capital, sipping rare vintage champagne under custom-designed ambient lighting. The lighting adjusted automatically to the ambient volume of the room, a highly complex feature powered entirely by my stolen, patented code. Waitstaff glided seamlessly across the Italian marble floor, guided by the precise, algorithmic routing software I had spent 3 grueling years perfecting in our home office. And right in the center of the bustling room, basking in the stolen glory, was Harper. She was wearing a breathtaking floor-length emerald green designer gown, effortlessly playing the role of the brilliant, visionary co-founder. She laughed brightly, touching the arms of powerful investors, projecting an aura of immense, untouchable wealth. Julian was entirely in his element. He moved through the affluent crowd with the magnetic, predatory charm of a man who firmly believed he was mere minutes away from securing his absolute financial independence. The digital clocks on the wall ticked inexorably closer to 8 o'clock, the designated time for the keynote presentation. I watched as the ambient music gracefully faded out on cue. The intelligent lighting system automatically dimmed the main dining area, focusing a brilliant, warm spotlight onto the small, elevated acrylic podium at the back of the room. The powerful crowd fell into an expectant, respectful hush. Julian stepped up to the podium. He adjusted the lapels of his tailored velvet jacket, flashing that familiar, devastatingly handsome smile that had once convinced me to share my entire life with him. He tapped the microphone, the crisp, clear sound echoing perfectly through the acoustically engineered spaces of the restaurant. He began his pitch. He spoke passionately about the future of food and beverage technology, weaving a compelling, entirely fabricated narrative about seamless automation, artificial intelligence, and a revolutionary dining experience. He spoke of the complex, proprietary systems as if they were born directly from his own tireless genius. He was expertly building up to the final, critical moment of the evening, the exact point where he would boldly ask the room for a Series A investment of $10 million. The tension inside the sports utility vehicle was a physical, almost suffocating weight. Elias stopped tapping his pen. He looked at me, a silent, heavy question in his dark eyes. The digital logs on my screen showed the restaurant's automated systems running at maximum capacity, entirely dependent on the fragile simulated network I was keeping alive by a single, delicate thread of code. The trap was set perfectly. The wealthy audience was captivated. The illusion was absolutely complete. I reached forward and smoothly closed the lid of the laptop. The sudden darkness in the vehicle felt like a deep breath taken right before a plunge into freezing water. I smoothed the lapels of my dark, tailored trench coat and checked the precise time on my silver watch. I looked over at Elias and gave a single, barely perceptible nod. I reached for the heavy door handle. It was time to pull the curtain down on this elaborate, miserable play. The final, tightest knot of this betrayal was about to be undone. I stepped out of the vehicle and into the cool, damp air of the Seattle night, walking straight toward the glowing glass doors of my own building. The heavy, custom-engineered glass doors of the Gilded Vine glided open just as the room erupted into a thunderous, standing ovation. Julian had just delivered his closing line, asking the room of wealthy venture capitalists for an initial investment of $10 million. The timing was almost poetic. I walked straight down the center aisle, my heels clicking sharply against the imported Italian marble floor. Julian saw me immediately. The charismatic, triumphant smile completely froze on his face, replaced by a sudden, frantic panic. He aggressively snapped his fingers, gesturing wildly for the two massive security guards flanking the entrance to intercept me and drag me out of the building. The guards did not move a single muscle. They stood perfectly still, their hands resting neutrally in front of them. Julian did not know that I had arranged a private meeting with the head of their security firm at exactly 3 o'clock that afternoon. I had handed over a certified cashier check that paid them triple their standard hourly rate for the entire evening, accompanied by a strictly revised list of authorized personnel. I was at the very top of that list. I stepped gracefully onto the elevated acrylic podium, ignoring Julian completely as if he were nothing more than a minor obstruction. I picked up the spare microphone resting on the gleaming stand. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice cut cleanly through the lingering applause, commanding absolute attention. The room fell into a sudden, confused silence. "My name is Mia Moore. Most of you in this room likely know me simply as Julian's soon-to-be ex-wife, though my legal team is currently expediting that particular correction. However, more importantly for your investment portfolios, I am the sole architect, the registered patent holder, and the exclusive legal owner of the entire automated software ecosystem you were just asked to purchase." I tapped a small, matte black remote I had brought with me. Above us, the massive digital projector shifted seamlessly. Instead of Julian's heavily fabricated revenue projections and inflated user acquisition charts, the giant screen now displayed the official United States Patent and Trademark Office registry. My name was highlighted in bold, undeniable lettering, situated directly next to a formal, legally binding revocation of the software license for the Gilded Vine. A collective murmur of shock and sudden realization ripped through the crowd of seasoned investors. Men in tailored suits began whispering frantically to each other, reaching for their phones. But I was not finished dismantling his life. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored trench coat and pulled out a thick, heavy legal document. It bore a bright, unmistakable red seal from the city courts. "Furthermore," I continued, turning my head slowly to look directly into Julian's pale, desperately sweating face, "this supposedly revolutionary technology startup is currently 6 months in arrears on its commercial lease. As the primary shareholder and chief executive of Azure Holdings, I am not only the creator of the technology you see around you, but I am also the anonymous landlord who owns the very walls of this building, due to multiple flagrant and incurable violations of our lease agreement, specifically the unauthorized, fraudulent transfer of equity. This formal eviction notice is effective immediately, right at this exact second." The stunned silence shattered. Harper, completely losing her carefully curated facade of elegance, pushed her way aggressively to the front of the podium. Her face was distorted with an ugly, unhinged rage. She began screaming obscenities at the top of her lungs, pointing a trembling finger at me, desperately calling me a jealous, vindictive liar. Her expensive emerald designer gown suddenly looked incredibly cheap against the pathetic backdrop of her public meltdown. Julian, completely broken and realizing the absolute finality of his ruin, collapsed onto his knees on the acrylic stage. He reached out and grabbed the edge of a prominent venture capitalist's suit jacket, weeping openly. He begged the investors not to leave, pleading frantically that it was all just a temporary domestic misunderstanding, promising wildly that he could rewrite the code himself over the weekend. They were completely, utterly pathetic. I did not waste another breath arguing or defending my position to ghosts. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and opened the master application for my proprietary system. I bypassed the fragile honeypot I had left open for his incompetent hackers and accessed the core administrative mainframe. I pressed a single, glowing red button on the screen. Instantly, the entire restaurant died. The ambient, algorithmically generated music cut off mid-note. The custom decorative lighting faded instantly to pitch black. The automated kitchen doors slammed shut and locked magnetically. The central servers crashed with a heavy final mechanical sigh. The only illumination left in the massive dining room came from the emergency exit signs glowing a sickly, pale green. I had initiated a total, irreversible cyber lockdown. The investors, ruthless corporate sharks who possessed an acute ability to smell blood in the water, did not hesitate for a single moment. They stood up in absolute unison. They buttoned their expensive coats and walked briskly, purposefully toward the main exits. I could hear them audibly canceling their commitments to their assistants and firmly blocking Julian's phone number as they walked out into the night. Julian's glorious, $10 million empire had completely and irreversibly evaporated in exactly 60 seconds. In the dark, empty shell of the freezing dining room, the inevitable happened. I heard Harper turn on Julian. Her shrill, panicked voice echoed in the darkness, viciously blaming him for being incompetent and ruining her life. Julian screamed back with equal ferocity, cursing her greed and her terrible advice. I left them right there on the floor, viciously tearing each other apart in the pitch-black ruins of their own arrogant creation. I pushed open the heavy manual release doors and stepped back out onto the quiet streets of Seattle. The storm had passed. I took a deep, grounding breath of the crisp, intensely cold air that smelled deeply of rain and wet asphalt. My phone vibrated softly in my hand. It was an urgent text message from Elias. He had just secured a massive counteroffer for the commercial building from a global tech firm, offering double the original valuation of the property. A genuine, unburdened smile spread across my face. I opened my digital contacts, located Julian's name, and permanently deleted his existence from my device. I slipped the phone securely into my pocket and walked forward into the glowing city lights. I was completely free, immensely wealthy, and absolutely, undeniably invincible. Thank you so very much to everyone for listening to my story today. I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please let me know in the comments below. If you found today's story engaging and empowering, please consider supporting our channel with a contribution of just $1. You can do this by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the video description and pinned comment. Your generous support allows us to pay our dedicated staff so they can feed their families, and it ensures we can continue creating these high-quality stories for you to enjoy. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.